Hello, I am Alan Ashlock, and I'm so very glad that you have this DVD and are watching this great program. This is the first, we hope, of many programs that we will produce from the Northeast Arkansas Area Churches of Christ Foundation, in which we'll be documenting the history of the Lord's Church in Northeast Arkansas, including congregations of God's people, as well as great gospel preachers and leaders who have made a great difference in the great work of God in this area. And we are thankful for every one of them, those who have long since passed, those now working very hard and faithful, and the future of the church we pray for strength and wonderful people to serve God. Today we're here in the home of G.W. and Fran Allison in Jonesboro, Arkansas. And it's a great honor to be in their home. And I'm very thankful that this is the first in a series of DVDs that we'll be producing. And it chronicles the great life of Brother G.W. Allison, 65 years of gospel preaching. And he and Fran have been married for some 63 years. And the great majority of those years have been right here in Northeast Arkansas. He's going to tell us now about this great story. And of course, there's no way to tell every single thing going back over 65 years. But we'll be talking about the great highlights, and I think you'll find it most fascinating. And I'm so thankful that it's being made, that it will be preserved for future generations to look upon and to remember and to be thankful for. And now here is G.W. Allison as he will tell his story.
Thank you very kindly, Alan, for those kind words. I was born in Egypt, Arkansas, October the 11th, 1929. I'm now preaching there and will in time conclude my work as a preacher where I was born. I lived there 5 years. One thing that's outstanding that I'll never forget, Brother George DeHoff was our preacher, a great preacher and writer of not many years ago. In December of 1934, we moved to St. Louis, living there a year and a half. In 1936, we moved back to Pocahontas. I well remember living in an old house. It was during the time of Depression years, and a lot of people didn't have much money, and that included us. Mother, sister, and I were worshiping at Piedmont Street. That's my home congregation. In the fall of 1938, we moved out into the country. We just had to do so. We lived in an old log cabin. Snow would come through the cracks. Very, very cold. But while my father had to work in St. Louis and would be home with us every few weeks, I was so fortunate that we moved very close, about a fourth mile away from my grandparents, my Uncle Harvey and Uncle Shirley, great Christian men. My grandparents were great, and my mother was a darling Christian lady. And because of that, I was touched by their dedication to the cause of Christ. And Brother Harvey and Brother Shirley would oftentimes discipline me, and I needed it. I'm grateful that they taught me to work while I was young. I chopped cotton and picked cotton 9, 10, 11, 12 during those years. During that time, speaking of me and my sister, we went to school at a 2-room schoolhouse, and we did not have a fall because that's the harvest time, but we had a summertime school. In 1940, Sister Ratliff, a member of the body of Christ, was our teacher, and Dwayne, her son, said, I want you to go home with me one day and spend the night with me. We'll go swimming. They lived just on the other side of Pocahontas toward Maynard. I think many of you have heard of Massacre Creek, just outside of Pocahontas. Well, I don't know anything about it other than putting on some ragged breeches, and they said I walked right out into the water and I couldn't swim a leak. I went under, and they couldn't find me. Fortunately, there was a candidate speaking above, and a man by the name of Hickenbotham made one dive and brought me out. By that time, they'd gotten a man who lived above Massacre Creek. They said he put my stomach on his knees, and water just came out like a fountain. Well, the doctor then came, and I was breathing. They didn't expect me to live. They brought me to St. Bernard's Hospital, and how small it was in those days. The next day, I came alive. I want to tell you, too, I was living there December the 7th, 1941, when Pearl Harbor was born. Even though I was 12 years old, I was troubled because of that. Very quickly, airport was built in Walnut Ridge, and they had to have an auxiliary field at Pocahontas. So that was on the ground where we were living, and I'm grateful because we were moved back to Pocahontas and had electricity again and didn't have to have an outhouse. We had many blessings. So when we got back there, in 1944, I made the greatest decision of my life, the greatest day of my life. 14 years old, I obeyed the gospel. I'll never forget that because I realized the blood of Christ washed my sins away when I obeyed the truth. My mother was so proud. I enjoyed school days in Pocahontas. I enjoyed all sports. In grade school, or should I say junior high and high school, I played football, basketball, baseball, and I loved them. Indeed, I did. A week before I graduated in 1948, I tried out for a scholarship here at Arkansas State. And I didn't know that I would get a scholarship, but by the end of the week, I was offered a scholarship. Brother, now I say brother, he's no longer with us, Buck Lawson, my teammate, great ball player, he had a scholarship at Kentucky University. He said, Chick, we need to go, and that's my nickname, Chick, we need to go north and make some money. And I said, well, I'm ready. Before I left town, bringing you up to this, the year before, 1946, my dad got a group of boys together to play ball, and he saw Coach Ditchler over here in Jonesboro to bring his team over here and play us, that is in Pocahontas, and they just walloped us, but, well, it was a disaster. And after the game, the coach said, Mr. Allison, I understand that catcher's your boy. He said, yes. Does he have any eligibility left? Yes, next year. He said, I've got to have him. Well, Dad said, I think we can work that out because I work in the livestock yards in Jonesboro, and I'll bring him over and he can pen cattle and pigs in the morning and play baseball in the afternoon. So I played for Coach Ditchler in 1947. And I told Coach, I'll play for you if I can worship each Sunday morning. I will not miss worship on Sunday morning. He said, I'll do that. Well, he resented it. He was not a godly man, had a foul mouth. And of course, he had to wait to get out of services. We usually start at 1:30, but he tolerated me. Before the season was over, the high school, the people in Pocahontas, the board, hired him as our football, basketball, and baseball coach. We were playing ball in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and a ball got by me, but it was out where I couldn't reach it. Went back to the backstop. I got it quick through it back and got that man out. And Coach Ditchler ran all the way from the dugout to me and said, you're going to be my fullback at Arkansas, at Pocahontas. You're going to be my fullback. You know, he kept his word. We had a tremendous year. We finally got beaten, one score in the semifinals of the state. But then that brings it back to the time that I was offered the scholarship. Here we are in 1948, ready to go to North. Coach Ditchler called me and said, Chick, we need you to play for us this year. And I said, Coach, I'm not eligible. He said, well, I'll tell you what. You need to stay with us because I know you can't play until a district tournament. Then you can, of course, you can't play. And I said, I don't think I should do that. My dad wanted me to play. Of course, I love all sports. Love baseball most. And I stayed. But you know what I told him? I said, I will not miss Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night Bible study. So that's fine with me. I said, don't schedule any games on Wednesday. You know what he did? He scheduled the Little Rock Doughboys on Wednesday night. And I said, Coach, I'll not be there. He said, you've got to be. You're the only catcher we have. I said, well, I'll not be there. Well, the boys came back over to the house during the day on Wednesday and said, Chick, you've got to play. Well, I wanted to play. And I said, Mother, what should I do? And she said, and she called me Chick. She said, Chick, you'll have to make up your own mind. Well, I went to Brother Les Perrin, one of the elders, and he liked baseball. And I said, what would you do? And he said, Chick, you know, you don't miss. And under the circumstances, why don't you play? Well, we began at 5 o'clock. I thought, maybe we'll get the ball game over. I took the car out there and didn't come on the bus because if I had time, I'd leave the ball game, make it for Bible study. We got into late innings. We were behind 3-0 with 2 on. I hit a home run, believe it or not. And that sent us into extra innings, and we won that game, but I missed that Bible study. I got back to the shower, and other boys came in, and Coach came in laughing and kind of in mockery. Boy, aren't you glad you missed Bible study tonight? And I said, I'll not miss another. He said, ha ha. In other words, and the next week, He said, we're going to play Wednesday. And I said, I'm not. Got to have you. I said, I won't be there. They said that waiting for me, the school was just 2 blocks from me. Coach looked down the road and didn't see me. Finally, he cursed, he swore, kicked the tire. They got beat 2-1 because the ball passed the catcher 2 times. That man scored, 2 men scored in third. I called the next morning. The fellas told me, said we got beat 2-1. Coach lived on Thomasville, Main Street, I called, in Pocahontas, and I stopped to see him. It was summer. The door was open. And when I came to the screen, his wife and daughter went out the back door, and I knew why. He used every word in the world. He blasphemed me, and I'm not wrong about that. He cursed, and he said, I'm telling you, you've done us wrong. We would not have lost. Look what I've done for you. When he got through with his rantings and his profanity, I said, Coach, you have not kept your word. He said, well, we're playing Cersei here tomorrow night, as you know, and you'll sit on the bench. I said, no, I won't. Goodbye. I'll never play for you again. Immediately, I called Buck. Buck, let's go north. I spent 6 months in 1945 in Pontiac, and we can get a job. We left immediately. We found a place to rent close to the church building, Tasmania, and we got a job right off the bat. Buck was not a member of the Lord's church. I talked to him. We hadn't been there about 2 weeks. He obeyed the gospel. Oh, what a blessing. They were able to go together in the north. Glad Coach helped along the way. And anyway, when he was baptized, 2 great people came into our lives. Brother and sister Tucker, Clifford Tucker. 2 of the finest Christian people you could ever meet. They took us home to dinner. In fact, we ate dinner with them every time. And Brother Clifford told me, he said, do you have a girlfriend? I said, yes, back in Pocahontas, and she's a member of the church. He said, I'd like for you to meet the little Van Hooser girl. Well, I didn't pay too much attention to that because I had a girlfriend. At any rate, about 2 weeks before we left, I came down with sickness. Buck called Brother Tucker. They took me to the general hospital. My fever was so high. Finally, when I got conscious enough, I said, God, I know I'm very sick, and if I get through this, I'll be a better Christian. I had what you call an abortive case of polio. And the doctor said, you're lucky. But now, I'm going to dismiss you. You'll be all right. But for a week, you do nothing. You stay in bed and do nothing. Brother Tucker said, you're staying with us. You know how many bedrooms? He had 1. I'm not. I'll sleep on the floor. I said, no, you're not, chick. You're going to sleep on that bed. Well, of course, he worked. And listen to this. He would come home, we'd have supper together. We'd have Bible study and prayer. My mother through the years said, son, I'd like for you to go to Harding. I said, Mother, I have a scholarship to play football at Arkansas State, and that's where I want to go. But I was touched by the spirituality and the concern and love that Brother Tucker showed me. And I called him not long ago, and I thanked him. I called him several times. At any rate, I wrote a letter to Mother, said, Mother, I'm going to Harding College. Of course, she was in great joy. Now, what about the little Van Hooser girl, my wife? In August, the last Sunday, he had told me about the little Van Hooser girl. The last Sunday we were there, Buck and I were about midways in the seats, and I looked back and saw the prettiest girl I've ever seen in my life. She was in a red dotted dress and was grinning. I just knew she was grinning at Buck because he was a better looking eye than I am, for sure. And I knew she's smiling at him, and I had a girlfriend anyway. Well, we got up, started down to class, and she came up to me and said, I'm Frances Van Hooser. How are you? And I said, oh, G.W. Allison. Went down, and she got pretty close to me, and it didn't take me long to realize she had a crush on me. Well, she asked her mother and father to come over that afternoon and sing at Clifford's house. We did. And I didn't have much of a place to sit, but she made her way somewhere between the seat and me. And that was telling me something. That night she had her father and mother to invite me and Buck over for refreshments. And she said, what are you doing? All this and that. And I said, well, how old are you? And she said, well, I'm old enough. I knew undoubtedly she must be pretty young, and that's true. At any rate, I didn't think too much about it because I had a girlfriend. That Thursday, we left coming back to Pocahontas, and I had a change of heart since I talked to some of my buddies. Aren't you going to Arkansas State? And incidentally, I played all 3 sports, and back then they didn't have many sports. I was looking forward to playing all 3, really. And I made up my mind. I said, Mother, I've changed my mind. I'm going to Arkansas State. She said, son, you gave me your word that you would go to Harding. I said, well, Mother, I can see tears in her big blue eyes. She called Les Perrin Jr., who was a junior at Harding. Oh, I'm glad he was there. He came down and said, Chick, your mother called me. You know, about an hour from now we'll leave on the bus to Harding. And you're going, bud. I said, no, I'm not. He was 6'2" and about 215, so I didn't discuss that much longer. He said, I'm going to take it with me. If you don't like it, you've got plenty of time to come back home and go to Arkansas State. I reluctantly got things together. I was mad all the way, an unhappy camper all the way to Searcy. They put me in what I lived to call Inner Sanctum. In those days, Harding campus wasn't like it was now. It wasn't very pretty. And I said, what am I doing here? If somebody come through going back to Pocahontas, I'd been off like that. I stayed unhappy for hours. What they called, I'm trying to think of that, Patty Hall where we ate. I waited late to eat. Got there, a lot of students were there. I was impressed. Every 5 minutes, a prayer would be worded for Thanksgiving for our supper. When I stepped out, I heard beautiful singing. And it was the young people gathered around what we call the lily pond. And I sang with them. After we had finished, 3 young men said, you are a new man. You're a freshman. I said, yes. Would you go with us to our room? We'll have a Bible study and prayer. And I accepted that invitation. My heart was touched when I heard those young men read, heard their prayers. I knew right then, I'm where I belong. And I never looked toward Arkansas State again. Very quickly, enjoying every Bible study at every chapel, my roommate, thanks be to God, was Joe Kenner, a gospel preacher, a junior. He preached one Sunday, first Sunday a month, at Dover, 7 miles north of Russellville. He was preparing a lesson for October, the first Sunday, and he said, Chick, I'm looking for a scripture and I can't find it. I said, what is it? Thou therefore, my son, I said it's 2 Timothy 2, 1 and 2. He turned over there and said, how did you know that? He looked at me and he said, you're going to preach the gospel. You know what was in vogue in those days? You're crazy as a bedbug. That's what I said. Well, you know what he did? He asked the elders if I could preach. When he got back, he said, the elders at Dover want you to preach. Don't let them down. Don't let God down. Chick Allison, you're going to preach. People don't realize I had stage fright. I didn't want to speak at all, but I always admired gospel preachers. Mother had preachers in for dinners. I heard Brother Joe Blue, one of the great debaters and preachers of years ago, touch my young heart. I had an upbringing by a godly mother, and I thank God for her every day. Suffice it to say, having come there, I didn't know what to do. Norman Starling from Imboden, the gospel preacher, senior, I said, I've been asked to preach November the 7th. I have never made an outline. He said, I've got a tract here by A.G. Hobbs on how to understand the Bible. I read that. I said, you know, I'm going to memorize this and preach it. You know what I did during that month of preparation? Nearly every night, I would go out in the dark and preach. Finally, the day came. We had to hitchhike. A drunk driver picked us up. We were miserable all the way to Jacksonville. Oh, when we got there and were safe, we breathed a breath of sigh. We made a good contact. We hitchhiked to Russellville. That day, people would pick you up. We stayed all night with Brother Ferris, a fine gospel preacher. Next morning, he took us to Dover. Brother Kenner preached a good sermon on the judgment. A fine family of a big family had us for dinner. I ate very little. I was already just, I can't do this. All afternoon, I was miserable. What am I doing? I can't preach. I've never preached. I've never made a talk. Time came. And I'm not using a hyperbole. I lost the saliva in my mouth. I was that scared. It so happened that a congregation not far away heard that a preacher was going to preach his first sermon. Can you believe it? That house was filled. And I couldn't sing. I said, what can I do? I was miserable. Just miserable. I said, I'll just have to tell the people I've never preached and I'm not ready to preach. My conscience bothered me. And I prayed fervently. What am I going to do? The last song was being sung. I said, well, you know what I'm going to do, Lord? I want to get up and try, and if I fall flat on my face, I will have tried. I got up there and preached 15 minutes. They listened carefully, and Joe hugged me and said, Chick, you're going to be a preacher. Well, that's when I began. Shortly thereafter, one morning I was sitting in the chapel. Being I was on the second row. And just before chapel began, someone came behind me and said, where do we sit? Where do we sit? I turned and looked at him. I said, well, what's your name? Jimmy Allen. I said, I imagine you'll sit with me. I'm Allison. Of course, he left high school. His mother died when he was 11. His grandmother died. So he left school in high school, joined the Army, did everything you could name. He lived in the gutter. Not happy, but that's the way he lived. When he came home, the only close relative was Lot Tucker, who was business manager for Harding. And Lot said, you don't have a place to go. I want you to go to Harding with me. The second term. We had 4 terms then. This was 1st of November, or right after I preached in Dover. And when he sat down, he said, like a warm-hearted, all you do around here is study the Bible? I said, no, we do other things. Well, what? I said, well, I play basketball. He said, when and where? That turned him on. I said, I'll be there at 3 o'clock. Well, he beat me. He had these things you put on the rubber pads on his knee, had a handkerchief tied, and he was smart at it, just tell you the truth. Hadn't had much upbringing. So a boy came in, he said, when somebody else comes in, we're going to play on 2-on-2. Brother Hall, a fine gospel preacher and teacher at Christian College in Edmond, Oklahoma, he and I stood Jimmy. Well, I was an experienced basketball player. I could hit the long shot, and I was quick enough to drive. He'd back off of it and hit the long shot. He thought it was luck. He'd back off of it and hit it again. He crowded me, and I'd go in and score. Well, we beat him badly. We played the second game, beat him worse, and he was mad. And when I was going in to make it 20, he stuck his foot out and knocked me like a football, like into the wall. And I hit and fell flat on my face. It hurt. But I knew what he was doing. He was putting me to a test. Elmo's face was red. He said, Chick, you better not do me that way. And I said, let me tell you something, Elmo. This boy is putting us to a test. We can take anything he wants to offer. If you've ever heard Jimmy talk about his past, he said really that day he began to take a look at Christianity. And I'm grateful to be able to say that. I don't mean to boast. Not long thereafter, I said, Jim, you need to become a Christian. You know what his reply was? I guess everybody ought to be a Christian. We didn't know this, but late at night he would leave the campus. Had he been caught, he would have been expelled. After I preached that sermon, he'd heard that I preached. On January the 12th, he obeyed the gospel. Thanks be to God he wasn't expelled. When I came back to school from home, many of the students met me and said, Chick, Jimmy obeyed the gospel. Shortly thereafter, we got out of class. He said, I want to talk to you. Chick, I know you're a preacher. We elected him as our president. He made announcements, and everybody just was spellbound. A natural speaker, good voice. He asked me, do you think I can preach? I said, Jimmy, that natural talent you have, all you need to do is rather study, and you're off. And, of course, many of you would know how he worked out. The next year, we're in the summertime. What am I going to do? I couldn't find a job. 1949. I called, by myself. I don't want to get mixed up. I got on a train, went back to Michigan. I had 2 aunts there. But Brother Tucker was there. I called him. He met me at the truck station. He said, you're going to stay with me as you look for a job. I said, no, I have an aunt here. And I talked a while. He said, do you have a girlfriend? I said, no, we broke up. I said, she didn't keep her word. I gave her 2 chances. She didn't keep her word. And he said, I want you to call the little man who's a girl. I said, what are you talking about? He would not get off my back. At supper time, I called. Pauline, my mother-in-law, answered. She always called me George. She said, George Allison. I heard in the background, whoa! I knew I was in trouble when I heard that. So I asked the mother, can I speak to Fran? Oh, she was glad to hear me, and I was glad to. I said, ask your parents if I could come and see you. Well, I didn't miss seeing her until we got married, and that was December the 6th. She was very young, and I was too. But I was praying for a Christian wife. She was praying for a Christian husband. And finally I mustered the courage to say, I know she's young and I am too, but I need her companionship. But before that took place, I left her the very last of August, went back to Pocahontas to go back to college, and I just couldn't go. My mother said to my dad when he came in, Cleo, let Chick have the pickup or the car. He's in love. I went back, and my father-in-law to-be was there, and when he saw me, you can imagine. Well, he told me where the school was. I picked her up, and then, of course, we got married in December. We started living in Pocahontas. In 1950, I was privileged to sit at the feet of Brother F.W. Gould, January through April, 3 hours every Monday. Greatest thing I ever needed. Put fire under me. I was only making $25 a week. These were tough times. Well, I stayed there and I started preaching a little bit. I'd already spoken, as you know, back in the year before. And the time came that I preached for Pocahontas while Brother Gould was gone. And a couple from Oklahoma, close to Comanche, heard me preach. And they told the brethren at Comanche, Oklahoma, there's a young man in Pocahontas, Arkansas that you need. And I told Fran, I'm not ready to preach. I don't have about 3 or 4 sermons. At any rate, those elders called me and said, we want you to come and try out on a Wednesday and Thursday night. And bless my heart, my wife, she said, Chick, you can do it. I know you can. So we made our way. We made our way. I tried out and they hired me. That began my preaching. And I'll say this, there are a lot of things I'd like to say. And Brother Allen may ask some questions and I'll try to answer them. But here are the places I've been in preaching. Comanche, Oklahoma, Thelma, Oklahoma, Lansing, Michigan, Piper Street in Pocahontas, Rector, Searcy, Corning, Nettleton and Jonesboro, Lepanto, and now the last one, Egypt, Arkansas. I've had a wonderful time. I've had great experiences. There are a lot of things I don't have time to share with you, but God has blessed my life. It's been my privilege, as mentioned by Brother Allen, to be in my 65th year of preaching. I've been able to hold more than 300 meetings during my lifetime. My life has been graced by heaven's grace.
Think about some of the gospel meetings that you have preached over the years. Do you know how many you preached, and what were some of the most eventful ones as far as responses to the gospel that you might remember?
All right. I held, like you said, nearly 350 meetings. I held a meeting in Rockford, Illinois, when there were 18 responses. That meeting was well attended. Held a meeting at, can't even remember the place now, we had 12 responses. In those days, Brother Allen, we would always have responses. Had many meetings, and we were talking before we began this set about funny things. I held a meeting in Morris, Oklahoma, and a lady was not a member of the church, and her husband was. She was a member of a church you can't read about in the Bible. And she came the first night. We held 10 days meetings in those days. She came about midway and heard. I think she came 3 times. The last night she was late. She sat on the back. He sat in the second row. And when the invitation song was being sung, when she passed him, even though the singing was loud, he shouted loudly, hallelujah. I'll never forget that. Tears gushed from his eyes. Now his wife was very big, very large. The baptistry was small. Bless her heart, she knew that there was a tremendous task under hand. She said, now, Brother Allison, you'll have a hard time baptizing me, but I'll just lay back and push me down, and I'll be baptized. The water almost came out of the baptistry, but that was an experience, and there are any number, but those were highlights. And I'd like to tell you about this, if I may, in conjunction. Preaching for the Piper Street, my home congregation, for 9 years the first time, and incidentally, I've been there 4 times. And I'm grateful to say that it's been my most rewarding work, even though it's my home congregation. We had a meeting scheduled for May of 1958. I had begun preaching for them in April of that year. Brother E.O. Harper had been scheduled, and he called us and said, I cannot come. He was associated with Herald of Truth. Jimmy Allen was doing his graduate work in Memphis and was preaching weekly at Lepanto. And I said to our elders, let me call Jimmy and see if I can get him to preach for us in the meeting. So I called Jimmy, and he said, Chick, I can't come. I'm preaching every I'm located in Lepanto. I've been away 2 months, and I don't think the brethren here at the school would let me. I said, Jimmy, we've got people who need to obey the gospel. We need you. We need you badly. And will you talk to your elders? And some way, somehow, tell them I'll come and preach every Sunday. He called me and said, they're letting me do it. I can't tell you what a great meeting. Each night, people came. In a few nights, people started obeying the gospel. Every night, people obeyed the gospel. People came from all around. We could seat about 700 people in. Finally, we had to bring in seats. Finally, we had seats on the rostrum, I guess you'd call it. People had to go down in the basement. We baptized 69 people in that meeting, 127 responses, the rest were restorations. I can't tell you what a gospel meeting is. It still thrills my soul. I'll remember that as long as I live. When I moved there, the average 166. God bless our work. We were 288 when Jimmy came to hold our meeting. After that meeting was over, it wasn't long until we were 375. So God blessed our lives, and that was a great event in my life.
As you look back on the years of your preaching, some 65 years, tell me about some gospel preachers you've known through those years. Some men that maybe many people have even forgotten. Older preachers that when you were a young preacher and that had an impact on you, and people you knew in Northeast Arkansas.
I'm glad you asked that question. Riley Henry from Walnut Ridge, great preacher. I heard him when I was young, touched my heart. Boyd Morgan, a great preacher. Heard him many times. Should have obeyed the gospel when I was 12 when I heard him. I was lost. God be thanked, 2 years I obeyed the gospel. And then there was Ruel Lemons who held gospel meetings. And any number of great gospel preachers, but those are the ones. And of course, Brother Taylor Davis, who lived to be 104, was our preacher. He touched my heart as our local preacher. I helped him in some work. And one day, they had work to do. The young people were invited, and I was the only one that showed up. I remember that. And then Brother F.W. Gould came, a brilliant Bible student, who those 4 months I've already talked about. Well, he was the one who said, you're going to local work. I told him, I said, well, I think I'll be a football coach, Brother Gould. On the side I'll preach. He always said G.W. He said, G.W., this was before I went to Comanche, you're going to preach all the time. You preached for me one night when I was sick, I heard you, and you're going to preach all the time. That's what I needed. Great men of God who touched my heart.
I'd like for you to kind of give a summary of what you've seen in the church in the past years of your life, and what you see now, and what you see as in the future. Just your own attitude about it, what challenges we face, and what things need to be done, what your hopes and dreams are.
Well, when I obeyed the gospel, throughout this section, we were united. It was amazing. All across this country, we were united. Preachers exchanging pulpits. But then came the opposition to the children's home and cooperation. I was a young preacher and went behind the ears, as it were, and I knew great men on both sides, and I didn't know what to do. We moved to Comanche. The Herald of Truth was being attacked shortly thereafter as centralized control. What am I going to do? Brethren I knew were, debating against the home. And you can just imagine how troubled I was. The unity that I enjoyed. Fortunately, with the help of Fran and others, I didn't jump on either bandwagon. I didn't know which one to jump on, but I'll tell you what I did. I'm glad they had debates. I attended every debate I could, made a trip to Abilene, Texas, to hear Brother Harper defend the truth on there's no violation of a sponsoring congregation receiving voluntary money from congregations. They don't surrender their autonomy. And the sponsoring church does not exercise guardianship over those contributing churches. They can withdraw their support anytime they want to. And I learned that. And, of course, that really hurt the Lord's church. And the church, right after that, Brother Allen, for 5 years, according to religious census, we were the fastest growing church, religious organization in our country. But I noticed in the mid-60s, liberalism began to rear its ugly head. And in those days, if a preacher failed to believe in the truth, had liberal thoughts, he would leave the church because the church wouldn't put up with it. He knew it. He'd just say, I no longer believe what you believe and teach what you teach. Goodbye. I'm not going to name some names, but I remember, however, over a period of time, and for a time I thought in the 70s, this movement was beginning to subside. But then another 10 years, liberalism has definitely increased. And my heart is heavy that in our brotherhood, we have the radical right that makes laws that they shouldn't make. God gives the laws. And we have some who've gone to the left to the extent they compromise the truth and will fellowship error. I say this kindly. I know what the Bible teaches. Both are unscriptural. Don't go to the radical right, I would say to our brotherhood. Don't go to the radical left. Have love for the truth. Love the truth. Don't tamper with God's word. Don't speak where it doesn't speak. Love one another, love the truth, and those two ingredients will maintain Christian unity. But when a member of the church, especially a leader, if he becomes unbiblical, that will cause division. If he becomes unchristian, that will cause division. But eradicate those two. Love one another, love the truth, and we're great, great power for good and reaching more people. But if we continue to divide, more and more people will be lost.
Thank you, Brother Allison. I appreciate you so much and your many years of faithful preaching of the gospel. It's been a great honor and a great privilege to be here in the home of G.W. Allison and his good wife, Fran Allison. People all over Northeast Arkansas know the Allison family. Not only Brother and Sister Allison here that we've talked to today, but their children and the influence of their family. And we believe the Church of Christ in Northeast Arkansas today, in 2013, is stronger and in better condition because of great men like Brother Allison who have faithfully preached the Word of God, who sowed the seed of the kingdom, who have encouraged people everywhere to stand for the right and to do the right thing. And I might say that Brother Allison has been a great inspiration and encouragement to me through the years in my preaching, and not just to me, but to so many preachers as they started their work, encouraging them not only by example, but by good words, by encouraging them in every wonderful way. And we salute Brother Allison in his many years, 65 years of faithful gospel preaching. And we believe this video will be preserved for future generations. We hope and pray until Jesus comes and this world is over, that this DVD will be preserved historically on the internet and also by purchase and passed from family to family as people look at the history of the Lord's church these past 65 years, the last years of the 20th century and these opening years of the 21st century, and that they'll be able to remember this great man, his good wife and family, and the great work that he has done. This is a production of the Northeast Arkansas Churches of Christ Heritage Foundation. It is our first DVD, and the Lord willing, we hope to make many more that will chronicle the history of God's wonderful work in this part of America. Thank you for watching, and may God bless you.